now? Can you hear me now?
I'm still not hearing Monty.
I can hear him online, Mike.
What's that?
I can hear him online.
You can hear him online?
How about now? I'm switching between things.
Okay, good. All right. Next up in the agenda is TCCC update from Harold Montgomery. Monty, take it away. Thank
All
you.
right. You'll want me to share screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. I need the
Give me
Tom's-
2 seconds.
Tom's gonna
Enabled.
give you permission.
Give me 2 seconds.
All right.
You're live.
Okay. Let me show my technological prowess here. There, y'all seeing my slides now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Monty from TCCC. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, and same with Captain Deaton, who's in the Philippines right now on an exercise with the Marine Corps. But I'll go over a few of our updates for this year and a little bit about TCCC in general, what we got going on. Slides go. So most of you probably familiar with us, and hopefully I've hidden a bunch of the canned slides here. There may be something pop up here and there, but I think everybody's pretty familiar with TCCC. About 40 to 45 voting members, depending on who's coming and going retirement-wise or something like that. Good mix of trauma surgeons, ER docs, and lots of medics and corpsmen. And then we have a lot of SME advisors, and then lots of consultants, experts across the board. Back in 2017, we were kind of consolidated with the Defense Committee on Trauma, which kind of married us up with and formed up sister committees with surgical combat casualty care and in-route combat casualty care. We're all one big happy DCAT family, putting our SME hats all together. We've been updating TC3 guidelines for years now, most recent January 2024, and we'll probably put it set out later this year. As we've got several changes ongoing right now, and I'll cover those here in a minute. Most of you are pretty familiar, all the changes over the years, either published in the Defense Health Board statements for a few years, and then since 2013, usually published in the Journal of Special Operations Medicine. With each change we do gets a publication that goes along with it. We've got our quarterly journal watch, where we keep up with all the literature to kind of prompt our changes, as well as putting out what ones we're looking at closely along the way. I think it pretty much mirrors a lot of what we all do. Many probably familiar with these numbers. This was early snapshot of basically the first 10 years of OEF and OIF that showed that about 24% of the battlefield deaths were potentially survivable. So it refocused us a little bit. In many cases, it's what we already knew, but what really came out of this was the junctional hemorrhage that we needed to target. But with that, we can see over time how many of our changes influenced the survival rates. So as we introduced tourniquets back around 2004, 2005 across the larger force, how the numbers changed, more survivability, the clotting agents, the 1 hour evac, flight paramedics, whole blood on the battlefield, all these things showing that gradual survivability increase over time there. So a little snapshot on curriculum. So starting in 2019, we began release of the new curricula that took over from the old TC3 all combatants and TC3 medical providers, all service members, combat lifesaver, combat medic, and the combat paramedic provider. These were all rounded out in a DoD instruction that basically said TC3 is the DoD standard for all now. That only took about 20 some years to get there, from when TC3 was first dished out through soft elements, and then across the greater force, and until it became a true DoD standard. And that's where the 4 tiers came from, was from that instruction, and then building the curriculum from there. So the all service members, which is designed more for the true all service member. This is the wrench turners, the sonar techs on submarines, and those type folks. It's not really for the infantry and the combat forces. It's for everybody else. It's basically stop the bleed on steroids with some airway capabilities. This has been out since 2019. All this is available up on Deployed Medicine. I'll touch on that a little bit, but it's basically life-saving skills Combat lifesaver. This is a little bit more for the true combatants. This is what we gear for the infantry and combat forces and special operations and that kind of thing for the average folks out there. So this has been out since 2020. Just a note on these two. We noticed in Ukraine, many of them, when we're saying all service members, it's what I described. It's kind of the sort of non-combat folks. They were teaching this to basically everyone because all their service members are combat folks in Ukraine. So a lot of feedback has come back saying this is not good enough for combat forces, and ironically, it wasn't really meant for true combat forces. That was this course. So many of the Ukrainian courses have kind of updated, and they're teaching more of the combat lifesaver type curricula now, and getting that more online. The tier 3 of the combat medic corpsman. This is kind of the hallmark one. This is our main population of getting medics out there trained. This was released in March of 22. Heavy focus on the blood resuscitation increases, tourniquet conversion, a lot of those things that didn't have a lot of hands-on tasks or graded tasks in the old TC3 really come into play on this one and put that up to training. And then the newer one, this is new to everyone, was a combat paramedic provider. That keyword provider has caused a lot of confusion as well. We're not meaning every provider in the DoD. Our target audience is the medical officers like doctors and PAs, that type, that are working at Role 1, that work at aid stations, that either operate with line units or train medics or supervise medics in the field, not necessarily your nurses and physical therapists at a combat support hospital. So a lot of confusion there. This one's been out since December of 23 and is available. So all the curricula build on each other. The ultimate intent is each one can teach the one below it and kind of reproduce and mass produce as needed. And then that combat paramedic provider being like the highest tier. That's your senior medics, your soft medics, and like I said, your docs, PAs at unit level, and they can build TC3 programs underneath them. Curricular content, we really expanded this over the development of all these. So it's more than just death by PowerPoint and some skill sheets. Lots of videos, lots of student skill cards and drug cards, just lots of different means of training and getting the course content across, trying to get to our next generation. So very mobile based, so they can see things on their phones and tablets. Basically all the curricula is available online. It's not an online course, but all the content is at their fingertips so that they can see whatever was just presented again. They can watch the videos before they're doing their training lanes and for refreshers and that kind of thing. So everything very mobile based and kind of that short attention span based training that we're trying to highlight with the next generation here. The other key piece with this whole curricula is a new train the trainer that actually expires as well. So this is also in league with NAEMT as well. So it marries up with their train the trainer as an add-on piece. But the key with this is it'll have a trainer update for TC3, so that as we make changes over time, then trainers can stay up to date. I have a habit of saying there's been 4 types of TC3 trainers in the world. There's the ones that are teaching the current TC3. There's the ones that are teaching whatever it was they learned in 2010. They haven't really stayed up to date. There's the ones that are teaching selective parts of TC3 and leaving things out and adding things here and there. And then the worst offenders of all are the ones that are teaching their version of TC3. So we're trying to eradicate all of those and get them down to just the one that is current and up to date. And this with the trainer certification expiring every 3 years. So most probably familiar, all of our content is available on Deployed Medicine. It's a website and a mobile app. So all of our content, not just TC3, but all of the JTS clinical practice guidelines, the in-route care, prolonged casualty care. We took down the COVID stuff. I need to change that little picture there. But all of our content is available on Deployed Medicine, and this is only growing as we speak, as we try to add more content all the time, more training across the spectrum, not just with TC3. So as always, nothing gets a pass because that's the way we've always done it. And we're applying this to us as much as everything else out there. Good quote by Frank Butler a few years back. And we're taking a good hard look at everything we've been doing for years. And are we doing it right? Does the science back us up? Does the lessons learned back us up? Feedback from the field, our own trauma registry from the Joint Trauma System, where we're looking back at our casualties as we've seen them over the last 20 years and seeing, what can we do better? Also taking into account everything we're seeing in Ukraine and Israel right now with the two different kinds of battlefields those are and how TC3 is being employed there, both in right ways and not so right ways, and seeing how we can improve things on that scale. So prolonged casualty care is rolled up under TCCC now. So that's a full-on working group. It started off as just a small working group under the DCOT. That is now a standing subcommittee under TC3. We're going to be publishing a 2.0 set of guidelines here in this coming year. Quite the overhaul to the existing ones that are out there. But this is now part of TCCC, not so much part of TC3, but they marry up where one leaves off, the other one picks up. And that's the intent of everything going forward. So everything with the prolonged casualty care guidelines are built off of that tier 3 medic, the combat medic corpsman, and them being able to manage casualties, not necessarily by themselves, but as an aid station group or a group of medics, hopefully that can pick up where TC3 leaves off. We do have a set of learning objectives and a basic training plan that's out there for PCC. It's not the full up curricula like we have for the other piece. That's kind of waiting on this next set of guidelines, and then we'll start building more deeper curricula for the PCC side. There's also the K9 TC3 guidelines published alongside. They basically mirror ours and highlight the K9 differences. They also have a curricula up and running, both one basically that's a combat lifesaver version, and one that's for medics and providers to be able to take care of military working dogs. So a little bit on our 2024 updates. Most probably familiar already. This is last year's stuff. We did some changes to our airway management. Kind of removed the chin lift jaw thrust as it's normally thought of, and modified the recovery position with kind of a head up chin, or head back chin up sort of positioning, a little bit different, and remove all the extraglottic airways from TC3. Basically, we simplified the airway management to basic positioning or a crike. That's what is seen by far in the combat trauma. As we look back on the registry data, it's basically two kinds of airways, either something very simple or something very complex. There's not a lot in between. Entitled CO2 monitoring added in here for the verification and continuous monitoring. That's a big change, and probably going to be a pretty big expense as this continues to move across the DoD. MPAs, not so much eliminated, but married up more with BVMs to enhance them, the use of BVMs. TBI, not huge changes here. Most of this is what was already existing in the tactical evacuation part. We moved it to tactical field care, and just put a little bit in here for the TBI management for that first 20 minutes or so. If we can handle it then something that can be done. Beyond that, it kind of lessens it down. We added the hypertonic saline in, and then kind of combined with the airway, the entitled CO2 monitoring, and trying to get the target ranges here. So not huge changes, just kind of movement from within the guidelines to give the guys on the ground something to work with, and the transitioning to prolonged casualty care, as we knew that piece was coming into play. A little bit of changes on the skill sets by responder, a little bit of eye charts. If you want to see this, you can pull it up on the deployed medicine here, but basically it's accounting for all the changes that we made and what levels these go to, down to ASM, combat lifesaver, or the medic. But this is a key part here, is where we're putting that entitled CO2 in the hands of every combat medic. Circulation skills, adding the collection of typo low titer whole blood on the battlefield. even though we were saying it in the guidelines, we didn't really have it in there as a task. So we fixed that and then removed plasma light since nobody was even using it logistically unavailable anyway. Added the monitoring in, like I said, the entitled CO2 monitoring, and then updated our meds a little bit. Again, we had things we were talking about in the guidelines. We hadn't updated this chart, but this did kind of formally and finally remove morphine from the battlefield. Then added calcium along with the blood products. I don't have a slide on it, but we are relooking our analgesics right now, as most of you are probably tracking if you're still using the oral transmucosal fentanyl OTFCs. Fentanyl lollipops are being discontinued in the United States, not elsewhere in the world, as we've come to find out. So other nations will still be able to use them, but we won't be able to get them here. So we're looking at our options for kind of that mid-level pain management and seeing how that works out. So more to follow on that whole piece there. Again, some more of our ongoing work. Chest trauma. A lot of this really comes back from our registry looks, and how many needles we've had put into chests, how many were actually necessary, how many chest seals were applied, and how many were actually necessary. And then really looking at what it is that's killing casualties. It's more the hemorrhagic shock than it is tension pneumothorax. And yet we have, like I said, lots of needles in chests and that kind of thing. So it's not so much a do away with needle decompression, but more of a de-emphasis of, it and the priority of the casualty management, and the hemorrhagic shock and getting blood on board is probably going to save more lives than needles in chest right now. And then chest seals are still just a big question of whether they're worth the trouble or not. And then toying with the idea of finger thoracostomy if after a first needle or something like that for the basic combat medic. So we're getting into some of those training skill levels of some of those questions as well. So this is our overall questions we're looking at for chest trauma. And really that first one is what drove a lot of this, is what's that true incidence of tension pneumothorax on the battlefield. And we're not finding that there was a lot of it. So it's not quite like the numbers that TC3 was based off of from Vietnam and the earlier conflicts. So we're taking a good hard look at that and already seeing that there's not nearly as much tension pneumothorax as there once was. And then probably our sites, we'll probably end up eliminating the mid-clavicular and just going with the lateral site, but still kind of to be determined. Most of this will be worked out here in this next month though. Other changes, we're kind of doing an overall relook of hemostatic agents, basically all of the products, and just seeing if there's any changes that we need to make here, and inclusion or exclusion of the different hemostatics that are out there. Just seeing if this changes. So same way we've looked at tourniquets and other devices from a science perspective, and then field testing, and then just feedback from the field as to what's the better agents, gauze and that kind of thing to be working on with hemostatics. One other piece here is the infectious part, and a lot of this is as we're transitioning to prolonged casualty care. A lot of the things we wanted to look at was, do we need to be switching out hemostatic dressings? Everything that we've used over the last 20 years has been, in there for a matter of hours before they get to surgical intervention. And we really wanted to look at some of the science behind all of these different dressings, not just do they stop bleeding initially or control bleeding, but what happens when they stay in for a longer period of time? Is there any kind of infections, any kind of complications, or do we need to convert hemostatics similarly to as we do tourniquets and either change them out or do something different? So just one of those key questions we're kind of looking at with the hemostatic review. TXA dosing and routes. What I can say right now is we're probably not going to change anything here. We took a pretty hard look at this, a lot of the data, and our real hard thing we were trying to determine was whether we wanted to go with the intramuscular administration, which could push for any kind of auto injector for the battlefield, Right now, not enough data that we're going to make that change. So TXA pretty much staying as is right now with the 2-gram dosage IVIO. So no change here, no proposal at the time. It's still continuing to look. That's some of our TXA questions. And like I said, our main question really looking at the IM administration. Antibiotics, this one actually we're kind of done. We've made our selections. It's not published in the guidelines yet, but we really want to look at, what's our best ones, what's the timing, and then reviewing all the previous years of antibiotic use, what are the best ones. And what we really want to kind of look at with the timing is, are we focused on these with TC3, or do we need to delay some of the antibiotics into PCC, or what are some of those redosings that might be needed in a prolonged casualty situation? When I say we have narrowed it down to these, cefadroxil, 1 gram PO or cephalexin 500 4 times a day as an alternative, and then good old ceftriaxone or Rocephin for IVIO that'll replace the ertapenem. So we've kind of come full circle, because that was one of the original TC3 IV antibiotics from 1996. So we had a good group of infectious disease docs, pharmacy folks that did a serious deep dive. Their presentation left no questions at the end based off their recommendations. So we kind of ran with these. The other plus to these is logistically, these are available worldwide. So that was another piece that we wanted to look into was, if we have supply line changes or challenges in conflicts, can we tap into alternate sources around the world? And the availability of these is a plus in that area. Triage. So this was discussed in the last talk, and I think we've been talking a lot of this in a lot of circles right now. So we are looking at a supplement to the TC3 guidelines that will highlight triage. There's a 1-page text that goes along with this picture, but basically what we're changing to and going to promote is kind of a first pass triage. That's just that kind of urgent, non-urgent, or sick, not sick has been described. That very first look, and then the second one puts them more or less into what we know of as the evacuation priorities that are the evacuation or the medevac priorities for normal medevacs throughout all of NATO. So this is a little bit of upending from doctrine and what's published in a lot of areas. So we're expecting a little bit of turmoil in this arena as this gets pushed out. But at the same time, recognizing that we can publish little pictures, we can publish text, but triage really comes down to training and training it right, which is very resource intensive if done right. Otherwise, as many of you know, it's experience based, and you're basing it off of whatever events you've had prior to, and that's hard to get with just 8,000 Army medics a year pumping through with what kind of training we can get to them. So looking at different options from digital online with deployed medicine to giving them good examples of how to build scenarios and do triage training in a more hands-on environment. But either way, getting it down to knowing that role 1 and combat medics are going to evacuate their casualties, that basically their triage and their evacuation thought patterns are the same. That's what really pushed a lot of this change. All right, a lot of the changes that we've talked about kind of made us relook a little bit of March itself, and do we need to make changes to it? March kind of came into play. I think the Brits kind of kicked it off around 2007, 2008. It took hold and it's kind of spread across the DoD, and I think many of the pre-hospital elements use some form of it. The de-escalation of needle decompression and the emphasis of blood products kind of making us relook things. These are all just examples of what we've thought about. If I were to lean towards one that I think the committee is probably going to go for, is probably the middle bottom, and that the part of M is just simply mobilize your blood products. If that's as handy dandy as you have FDA approved cold stored Olo titer in a golden hour box, then get it going. If that means you've got to start drawing blood from your walking blood bank of buddy blood banks, then you get that process started. So it's not likely to end up with a true rearrange of the letters, but we'll highlight and escalate blood and blood products and the true hemorrhagic shock resuscitation to a higher level. What that does leave is, some of the things that we have in circulation, which is our big spot for tourniquet reevaluation and reassessment, and how we're going to arrange that. That's a huge problem in Ukraine we're seeing right now, is the lack of tourniquet conversion or tourniquet replacements, and many limbs being lost because high and tight tourniquets are put on and left on for hours to days, and we're trying to find ways that we can change that. So like I said earlier, tourniquet conversion is actually part of a hands-on skill, graded skill in tier 2 and tier 3. So we moved it down to combat lifesaver level. So it's kind of split into 2 tasks with tourniquet replacement, which is really just taking a high and tight and bringing it down to a more properly placed tourniquet, or the full-on tourniquet conversion that converts it to a hemostatic or a dressing, but getting that training across in better ways. But that comes into a key play with where that fits into the March protocol or March algorithm or March sequence. It gets a lot of terms out there. We kind of see it more as a sequence than an algorithm, and teaching it that way. General working efforts we got, obviously, potential warfare in the future will entail extreme cold weather. So our folks in Alaska have been taking a good hard look at TC3 and extreme cold weather, what interventions work and what don't, what things freeze quickly, and what you have to keep next to your body to even keep warm and be prepared for. And then probably as well another change to the March sequence that's more of an MHARCH that moves hypothermia up to right after bleeding control, because if you don't keep them warm or keep them from getting cold, then none of the other interventions are going to matter anyway. So just hard look at this. There's a few meetings over the summer that are going to spell this out a little bit more detail. A full-on clinical practice guideline from JTS with a TC3 section specific to cold weather. Another piece, and you guys have been way ahead of us on this part for years, is pediatric and TC3. The fact that there's kids on the battlefield is no surprise. It's been a problem for a long time. Finally, we're going to get down and address it. The key that we're looking at it from the lens that we're seeing it through is that it's what does a combat medic have that he can use on kids. So it's not about a separate set of guidelines. It's not about separate equipment. It's about what that he already has as a combat medic, that he's going in with a strike force that he's having, that he has on his back, that he can use either in dosing or application for kids. So that's really the aperture that we're taking on this view. So a little bit challenging in itself there, but we'll see how this pans out over the next year here. Another big piece is TC3 research development, testing, evaluation. Over the years, we've published top 10s of priorities. With this next version, we're going to break each one of those out into a top 10. So a top 10 research topics, or top 10 development, and then really what comes down to a lot of COTC's bread and butter is a top 10 in testing and top 10 in evaluation. So these are the two that have kind of failed a lot, and certainly in the DoD side, where we get good feedback on testing evaluation of equipment before it gets fielded. And that's not just a TC3 thing. This is kind of a medical thing across DoD, that things don't get well tested in the field environment or in the environments they're going to get used in. So we have lots of good studies on, do things work in a research environment, but do they work in the true combat environment, or under stress or the field conditions? That's where a lot of things don't get the deeper testing and have high numbers of tests. We're trying to fix that and give our priorities to what devices and interventions that we wanted at a higher level. Let's see, I think I'll roll it up there. Unless there's any questions, I can elaborate on anything in particular, or turn it back over to y'all.
Hey, it's Rich Kamen.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much. That was a Great update. That was fantastic. I've got a question about the literature that's referenced. I've seen the, like the literature watches, the conglomerations of all the stuff that's thought to be important. Does TCCC have a formal evidence evaluation process? I've always wondered. It's like one thing to list all the stuff that you looked at. It's another thing to have a process to deciding, what's valid, what's crap, why you used it, why you didn't, that kind of thing.
So I guess I actually have a partially built hidden slide on that. I'm going to try to brief it later in the week for the main Soma piece, because that's a part that's under development. So I'm using air quotes, TCCC recommended has been a bane of my existence for a few years now. I went through the tourniquet nightmare myself there a few years ago, trying to relook the tourniquets and what that really means. It's a struggle. So what we've come to, and to be honest, we were trying to get ourselves out of the business if possible. However, we come across DoD instructions and policy out there that actually quotes TCCC as an entity that has been tasked to do this by the DoD. A couple of regs we didn't even know about that we're by name in there as an organization that is supposed to be doing this for Defense Med Log. So we're kind of retooling ourselves on that. What we're going to do first, and as we kind of develop this new process, is develop a preferred features of various devices and equipment. This worked very well on the chest seals when we did that. I want to say around 2014, 13, 14, where we just put out a set of preferred features in chest seals. The number one thing being, that they were supposed to have a one-way valve. And industry responded very quickly and easily. Now, granted, it's a chest seal, pretty easy to make, make it more sticky, make a one-way valve, that kind of thing. Not as robust as other pieces of equipment, but it worked. We put out a features, and industry reacted. The way forward is we're going to continue doing that on any of the devices and products that we feel need to have that specifics of measurements, and then that will in future be our measuring tool for evaluating when we look at things. So that will then couple with how we do things anyway, which is look at all available evidence. We scan the literature. That's one of the reasons for the quarterly journal watch is we're scanning all the literature. So we see any of the studies on any devices or products or types of interventions that could improve how we're looking at these. And then looking at the DoD studies. So we get a lot of information out of the institutes, like the Institute of Surgical Research and Naval Medical Research Unit, to get field studies as best we can. That's again circles back to why we want to publish those top 10 of test and evaluation priorities. So these things all feed together so that we can actually have better information that is giving us the right data, the right evidence towards making those decisions. So like I said, for as much as I wanted TCCC recommended to slowly go away, it's probably going to stay, but we're going to better define it, and partially so that it's not so much us making decisions, but so that it's like, here are the metrics, here are the features that are needed, and then industry, units, resourcing people, combat developers, whoever it is, can look at devices based off of those features and metrics and potentially make the decisions themselves. So if that means the Army, Navy, Air Force are just looking at our list of required features and grading devices and products based off of that, then so be it. If it circles back and it's still TCCC having to do it, then we look at it in our process. But either way, that's kind of the way ahead and modification to what we've been doing before. Does that kind of answer your question, I hope?
It does in part. I mean, I guess the other part of this, in addition to the requirements and the evaluative process for a specific device or intervention, there's a lot of stuff that gets written about how medicine is done or what you should do and what changes may be, et cetera. And sometimes it's very well done research, and we really have to never ignore it, or it's crap research that even though it may seem attractive, it's so poorly done, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And to me, there's an interesting part about, and it's unfortunately a really work-intensive, labor-intensive process to evaluate this stuff, but it makes the process a lot more transparent and reproducible, so that when we're looking at what somebody used as a support for why they made the decision they made, then we also have an understanding of, you know, how decent the literature that they used was. And that's what I was getting at, but it is a way intense process.
I totally understand. Now, that's actually another piece that we're putting forward is how we're grading our evidence. We've used I'm going to mispronounce the Turnike paper from 2010. It's basically the American Heart Association guidelines. We've kind of modified those a little bit. And that's basically how we're going to grade evidence. Now, granted, the vast majority of pre-hospital, as we all know, doesn't have a lot of good double-blinded studies and those kind of things. So, I mean, we're all too often when it comes to pre-hospital studies and research, we're looking at, you know, best case is mostly retrospective studies and chart reviews. And we're kind of the same thing on the DoD side. So, I mean, that's kind of a handicap that we all have when it comes to the data that we're looking at. When it comes to the evidence, now then we've just got to balance that with the kind that are true test and evaluation type things where they're looking at products. But I trust me, I know that struggle. That's one that we work, and it's where we put forward with each of our change leads. So that's one of the reasons we've. I'll slide back a few slides here. That's one of the reasons we've narrowed down each one of our changes to, okay, go into everything and look at each one of these questions and answer the questions as best we can based off the evidence, and then grading that evidence along the way. But trust me, I know that pain.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I see questions in the chat, but I'm trying to figure out how I can get to that. There we go. The burp maneuver described in TCCC and why that is different. We talked about burping the chest seal. Is that the question? I guess, is that a question to me, or is that just an ongoing conversation there?
Joff, you're muted.
Monty, this is Joff Shapiro. And if you remember back a couple of years ago at the National Association of EMS Physicians Conference, you were kind enough to also talk to TECC there. The conversation was around the synergy between TCCC and TECC. And for those that may not be familiar with the current relationship between the two groups, TECC does have a liaison with TCCC. Our very own Dr. Andy Pinart has been part of the TCCC process now for going on a year. But also, can you comment for those people who may be here at the meeting related to the use of TCCC in the civilian setting versus the use of TECC in the civilian setting? Because despite the messaging, there still are several significant professional organizations and conferences that are centered on TCCC in the civilian setting.
Certainly, completely understand. We gear everything towards the combat casualty care and the battlefield scenario, in the sense of hours to days when it comes to evacuation. All of our equipment is based off of little in the sense of vehicles and what can fit into an aid bag on a medic's back as they're on foot with infantry forces. And everything is about training a small group of enablers in the sense of those same infantry to buddy aid and first aid to each other based off of the TC3 principles. So we're not based off of quick evacuation to hospital systems. We're based off of true combat and that big difference. For other nations that are adopting our training in particular, it kind of is based off of how their military structure is. as we've seen in Ukraine, they've done a heavy adaptation of TC3 to the point that it is actually in their national law that that their forces be TC3 Americanized TC3 qualified, which has been a little bit of a struggle because they weren't as ready for the equipment side of the house as kind of our guidelines laid out. So it's been a little bit of a struggle. But it's also highlighted, like I said, some of the, in particular, tourniquet conversion piece. So that skill set in itself, probably not a big deal in American law enforcement and EMS, and wasn't a big deal for American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan with 15 to 60-minute evacuations. The application of tourniquets on wounds that probably did not require tourniquets was not that big of a deal. However, what we're seeing now and what we expect to see in a large-scale combat operation would be very similar to what we're seeing in Ukraine, where wounds that do not require tourniquets, that get tourniquets and they get left on, are going to cause more problems. So we're highlighting that tourniquet conversion piece. So I think many aspects like that, or other ones like the antibiotics, where we're more concerned with what's going to happen over hours to days of evacuation, is not as much of a scenario for the civilian tactical emergency side. So there's several key differences. All of the equipment things that we're looking at, so like tourniquets, we are completely looking at that from a military perspective. And one of the key things probably being a locking mechanism. That if I put a tourniquet on, I need it to be able to stay on there, and it locks itself. Maybe not as big of a deal when you're only 15 minutes from a hospital on the back of an ambulance, and that kind of thing. So just different options, different requirements based off of, to me, very different settings. Principles carry over, and principles are very much the same, of deal with the threat, deal with the bleeding. But that's where a lot of things start shifting and changing is after that, from a civilian side of the house to the military side. Is that answering the question, I hope? I'm not hearing anything that end. Did y'all lose me on my monologue there? Sorry.
No, I mean, we're still here online. I don't know what happened to them. I didn't see what happened to Joff.
Okay.
But I appreciate the answer.
Did I answer it good?
We still have you. There's one more question. Hey, Monty, this is Flo.
Hello, Ricardo.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier that kind of jumped out at me is when you were talking about the data of chest injuries and you were relating the data to Vietnam versus what we recently have seen. And when I look at the environment that we might be going into the Pacific, maybe the data is different because we were wearing body armor. What's the likelihood of us wearing body armor in the heat and the humidity of the Pacific? Will we see the same kind of injury pattern that we did in Vietnam?
We're also bringing into question a little bit of how much of that was truly the injury pattern. Keep in mind, much of the Bellamy study was based off of KIAs, and identifying true tension pneumothorax out of an autopsy is a challenge as well. So we're kind of re-looking a lot of that data as well. I mean, we can't do the deep dive on it that we can the current registry, but how many of the casualties truly were tension pneumothorax casualties as well. So it's kind of twofold, but I don't know, you're asking the wrong guy when it comes to the body armor piece. I mean, that's pretty common now. I'm not sure they're going to ditch the body armor too quickly. Now, what concerns me, and I'm stepping back into old job days, is how they minimize the body armor. So down to the plate carriers and that kind of thing, instead of true body armor. That's where we're going to start seeing different kinds of injuries again. I don't know. I mean, that gets into tactics, which always affects things. I mean, IEDs were a tactic that we had to change and adjust to, and we saw junctional injuries in ways that we didn't see before, partially because of the IED tactic. We're seeing similar but different things now with the UAV attacks from, high above, is causing different kinds of injury patterns. So tactics are always going to dictate these kind of things, and we can prepare for them best we can. But I don't know. I mean, yes, you're right. I mean, we're partially based off of body armor being a protectant from the, but at the same time, what we can see and have seen is that the hemorrhagic shock is what is likely to kill casualties faster. And that's the piece we're looking back and wondering about the Vietnam data is, how much of that was, a hemorrhagic shock death as well, versus not necessarily eliminating tensional thorax, but what killed them faster and what can we save them faster. And getting blood on board is that maybe the best answer possible. And, ideally, if we can get things like plasma to the battlefield and things like that, then that could change that parameter a little bit more even as well. So am I answering your question there?
Yes, you did. Thank you, Monty.
Thank you, Monty. We really appreciate you taking the time and talking to us, and certainly look forward to the continued relationship between TCCC and CTECC.
Certainly. Thank you. Wish I could be there.